In the shadow of dying stars and the ruins of ancient cathedrals, once lit by the flame of Imperium faith, silence fell like dust across the void. The segmentum obscurus, once a frontier of glory and fire, now drifted in hollow echoes. Planets flickered like candles nearing their end, their skies darkened by age, war, and the silence of forgotten prayers. And amid the blackened ash of victory and loss, a name stirred once more: Abaddon. The first time his name was whispered, it was as a soldier, the last time, as a god. But in between those echoes lies a man, not born monstrous, but broken into divinity. He had been Horus's son, not by blood, but by purpose, loyalty, and belief. In the early years, before treachery bloomed into a galaxy-wide slaughter, Ezekal Abaddon stood beside the Warmaster as his first captain. He was carved from war, armored in wrath, yet driven by something older: faith in unity, in order through strength. For all his brutality, Abaddon believed in the dream his father had once held, that mankind could be unchained. And then came the heresy. When Horus fell, when the Emperor lay broken upon the golden throne, Abaddon did not weep. He did not shatter like the others. He stared into the abyss his father had made and walked forward, because if the gods had failed Horus, then the gods must answer. The Imperium named him Despoiler. The Eye of Terror crowned him Warmaster anew. But he had no crown, only his father's blade, Draconian, a demon forged from the whispers of despair, and the weight of legacy turned to ash. They thought the long war was rage. They were wrong. It was grief. In the twisting worlds of the eye, time had little meaning. Centuries passed outside while Abaddon remained unchanged, preserved by dark powers, not out of mercy, but because they feared what he might become. Yet even the gods, mighty and formless, miscalculated. He did not serve them. He used them. Within his soul burned the memory of Horus, not as traitor, but as promise, that mankind might be unbound by the Emperor's brittle corpse and the lies of the ecclesiarchy. That chaos, for all its madness, could be forged into unity, not devotion, domination. So Abaddon gathered the fragments, the broken legions, the scattered champions, demon princes, rogue psychers, warlords with delusions of godhood. One by one he broke them or bound them, offering not redemption, but purpose. And in return, they gave him a throne of iron and spite, built not to honor gods, but to defy them. Yet still, in private moments, he dreamed of Luna, of a place before betrayal, of Loken's laughter, of the hushed stillness aboard the vengeful spirit before it turned from salvation to weapon. And he hated that he remembered, hated the ghost of Horus that still lived behind his golden eyes. In his quietest thoughts, he did not rage at the Imperium. He mourned it, but mourning was weakness, and weakness could not forge destiny. So he cut it away, bit by bit, with every Black Crusade, with every ruined shrine and toppled fortress. He carved deeper into himself, into the man who had once believed, until all that remained was the Despoiler, and still the stars wept, because they remembered what he had once been, because they feared what he was becoming. Above the ruins of Cadia, now broken and drifting in a sea of debris, Abaddon stood upon the deck of the Eternal Vengeance, his gaze not toward the dying, but the still living Imperium. He had torn open the galaxy. The Cicatrix Maledictum, a scream across the heavens, marked his legacy not in monuments, but in scars. Yet it was not enough. The Imperium still stood, and Abaddon, armored in black and crowned by fire, whispered not in triumph, but in warning. This is not vengeance. He looked to the stars, to terror, To the throne his father failed to take. This is reclamation. Behind him, his lieutenants kneeled, some born mortal, others once Primarchs now lost to madness. All waited. But Abaddon remained still, because something inside him still breathed. Not love, that had died long ago, but doubt, not in his cause, in himself. He had walked 10,000 years through blood and flame, had wielded gods as weapons, broken civilizations like glass, and yet, standing upon the ashes of his latest victory, he felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, only the cold realization that victory had not healed him, and would never. He turned from the stars and descended into the shadows of his ship, toward his next war, his next betrayal, his next death, and the galaxy, in silence, braced for what he would become. For Horus's failure had torn the Imperium, but Abaddon's victory would end it. The Eye of Terror was not a place. It was a wound, a gaping rent in reality, where time unraveled and gods whispered promises no mortal ear was meant to hear. Within its depths, planets hung like broken teeth, shards of worlds consumed by madness and reborn in the image of ruin. Among them drifted the eternal vengeance, Abaddon's flagship, wreathed in warpfire and silence, a cathedral of iron forged from despair, and deep within its bowels the Warmaster sat alone. The War Council had ended hours ago. Slaves lay dead against bulkhead walls, executed not for failure, but for asking the wrong question. Even now, the echoes of that moment rang in Abaddon's mind, carried not in sound, but in shame. The same shame he crushed each time it rose. He could not afford reflection, not now, but it haunted him anyway. A hollow flicker danced in the gloom, its ghost light revealing a faint silhouette. Horus, not the bloated abomination that died at the Emperor's hand, but Horus as he had been. Armoured in gold, eyes burning with vision, voice calm and unshakable. A lie preserved in memory. Abaddon stared at the image. He had studied this projection countless times, each angle memorized, each command recalled, not to worship, but to measure, to understand where Horus had failed and how Abaddon would not. A hiss broke the silence. The air shimmered, and a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, robed in crimson and rust, his face hidden beneath a mask of brass and bone. Leorvine Euchris, once a captain of the World Eaters, now something else. "You summon me, Warmaster," Leor rasped, voice distorted by implants, madness, or both. Abaddon did not look at him. "You've been raiding the loyalist remnants in Segmentum Tempestus." Leor's smile, though hidden, could be felt. "Yes, they scream well." That was not the order. A pause, long, uncomfortable, then laughter. "Since when do gods care for orders?" Leor asked. "You have their favour, Ezekiel. Why waste time pretending you do not?" Abaddon turned, slowly. The gaze he gave Leor was not angry. It was empty. "You still believe this is about gods?" Leor tilted his head. "Is it not? I will not be Horus." And with that, the silence returned. Leor said nothing else. He bowed, mockingly or in reverence, it was hard to tell, and faded into the dark, leaving Abaddon with a fading, hollow image of a father who had become a warning. He closed his eyes. He remembered Loken. Not the fight, not the betrayal, but the quiet moments, the shared respect, the idealism that felt childish now. Loken had once told him, during the campaign on 6319, "Even monsters have rules, Abaddon. Without them, we become what we fight." But the rules had broken. So many times. There were no heroes left, only survivors. And yet, Abaddon rose and stepped to the star map that flickered before him. tracing his gauntlet across glowing systems. Each one had burned beneath his wars, and yet terror remained, a golden wound pulsing on the edge of the impossible. Was he afraid of it? He did not know. In truth, Abaddon feared nothing, not death, not pain, not even failure. But he feared becoming irrelevant. He feared that in the end, he would become what the Imperium already believed him to be, another madman chasing a crown he could never claim. And that was why he could not stop, not now. He summoned his lieutenants again. They arrived one by one, Fabius Bile, half smiling and half rotting. Khan, silent for once. Lucius, already reshaping his face with a blade, and a demon prince whose name had long since been lost to mortal tongues. They were not allies, they were necessary. Another crusade, Abaddon said. The room grew still. You just shattered Cadia, Bile muttered. Even the Imperium bleeds. Let them rot. Let the tear widen. Time favours us. Abaddon shook his head. Not time. Action. They believe the worst is behind them. He stepped forward, casting a shadow over the table. I will teach them that it has only begun. He turned to the demon. Call them all. The war bands, the lost legions, even those who still curse my name. The demon's voice was mist and poison. And if they refuse? Abaddon looked back at Horus's flickering image. Then I will do what my father never could. He reached out and shut it off. I will burn them. The meeting ended, but Abaddon did not rest. As the ship drifted deeper into the eye, as rituals were prepared and banners were raised, he stood alone at the observation deck, watching the warp storms ripple like blood across glass, and he whispered to himself, this time they will not forget me, because this time he would not march as Horus's shadow, he would march as his reckoning. Time within the Eye of Terror was a cruel mockery of the Imperium. Seconds stretched into centuries. Memories faded only to return sharper. And for those cursed with immortality, the past was not dead. It lived, breathing behind their eyes, whispering truths too terrible to forget. Abaddon stood upon the blackened spires of Uralan, a fortress world that did not exist on any imperial chart. It was a place pulled from myth, built on the bones of traitor Primarchs and bound by rituals older than language. It was here that he would gather them, all of them, the fragmented remains of what once was the greatest force the galaxy had ever known, the legions. But they were not what they had been, and that was the first betrayal. The World Eaters were no longer soldiers, they were beasts. Blood-drunk, lost to the echoes of Khan's laughter, worshipping slaughter over strategy. The Emperor's children sang as they killed, reshaping flesh and sound into weapons of corruption. The Death Guard no longer cared for war, they endured it, spreading rot as if decay was salvation. The Thousand Suns spoke in riddles, their sorcery bending causality but fracturing sanity. And the Black Legion, Abaddon's chosen sons, stood in silence, watching, waiting. He paced before them now, his armor glinting with the dull sheen of void light. Each step echoed across the obsidian hall. No banners flew, no heralds announced him. There was no need. He was the echo of every failure they had endured, the only constant in their long damnation. 10,000 years, Abaddon began, voice cold and heavy. We have drifted in the dark. Some sneered. Others said nothing. One muttered in a tongue not heard since before the fall. 10,000 years of vengeance without victory. Rage without purpose. He paused. And still, we kneel to the gods who mock us, who use us. A low growl rumbled from the rear. One of the word-bearers, draped in crimson runes, stepped forward. They are not mockery. They are the divine. Through them, we are immortal. Abaddon's eyes narrowed. And what has that immortality given you, Marnock? 1,000 years trapped in the ruins of Sicara, feeding on the memory of battle, while your brothers were hunted like dogs. He stepped closer. Did your gods help then? The word-bearer reached for his weapon, but Abaddon was faster. Drachnian howled as it left its sheath, and with one stroke, the demon blade cleaved Marnock's head from his shoulders. No war cry, no warning, just silence. Let that be the last time piety is mistaken for power in my presence. He turned to the rest. I am not Horus. I do not need your devotion. I demand only this: follow or fall. None moved, but slowly one figure stepped forward, tall, reeking of rot and ancient sorrow. Typhus, herald of Nurgle. His voice, when it came, was like grave soil turned to breath. And where would you lead us, Ezekiel? What makes your crusade different from the others? Abaddon did not hesitate. I do not seek revenge. I seek inheritance. He walked the length of the hall, Drachnian still dripping with warp venom. The Imperium still lives, not because it is strong, but because we have allowed it. We have fought each other for scraps of glory, for meaningless victories. That ends now. He stopped before a massive, half-shattered statue of Horus. I will not wear his shadow any longer. With one mighty swing, he shattered the statue at its base. It cracked and fell, the Warmaster's face breaking into dust. A gasp rippled through the chamber, not of fear, but recognition. Abaddon turned, armor gleaming with crimson motes. I will not be the echo of failure. His voice rose like thunder. I will be the storm that follows. Something shifted. They felt it, not in the hall, but in the warp itself. A ripple, like gravity bending. The god stirred, watching, waiting. And for the first time in millennia, the fractured legions did not sneer, did not argue. They listened, not because they believed, but because for the first time, something stronger than faith was offered. A future. Typhus inclined his head. Then lead, Despoiler. We will watch what becomes of your dream. Abaddon nodded. Then watch closely, for this dream will be carved in fire. And he left them, his shadow long, his silence louder than any proclamation. As the warp churned above Uralan, as storms began to howl across the void, the first Black Crusade was whispered into being, not by prophecy, nor divine will, but by choice. Abaddon would not rebuild the past. He would bury it, and from its grave a new age would rise. The war drums of the warp do not beat like those of mortals, they scream. Across the tides of unreality, shrieking tendrils of power reached out like the hands of mad gods, and from every ruin, every shattered keep, every dead moon that still dreamed of conquest, they came. Warbands, pirates, demon-kissed champions, the dead and the undying, the lost sons of the legions, and all of them came for one reason. Abaddon had called, but not all came willingly. Far across the eye, hidden in the veil of warp storms and shrouded by dead gods' laughter, the Iron Warriors had retreated to their bastion fortress, Medrengard, a world of rusted engines and endless sieges. There, Perturabo's bitter legacy endured, an empire of cruelty built from logic and steel. And it was here that Abaddon chose to go next, not with an army, but alone. Medrengard's skies were always red, not the red of sunsets or blood, but the deep, dead crimson of rusted iron. Mountains moved under their own weight. Cities crawled. Guns longer than space hulks turned to track the lone black vessel descending into orbit. Abaddon emerged in silence, a towering silhouette beneath an eternity of hatred. They met him at the gates. Warsmith Routh Sargol, a giant of iron and smoke, greeted him with a contemptuous growl. "You presume much, Despoiler. This is Perturabo's domain. You walk it only by our will." Abaddon stepped forward, unshaken. "I walk where I must." Sargol's servo claws clicked. "You come to threaten?" "No," Abaddon said. "I come to remind you." He looked past the warsmith to the towering black fortress beyond. "You built this world to endure, not to matter, but even fortresses rust." Sargol narrowed his eyes. "We are not your broken pets, Black Legionnaire. We owe no fealty to your crusade." Abaddon's voice dropped low, like steel grinding bone. "You owe it to yourselves." He turned slowly, his cloak rustling across the ground. 10,000 years you've guarded your machines, your walls, your pride. And what has it earned? The Imperium forgets you. The gods mock you. Your legion rots in place, waiting for a Primarch who will never return. Sargol bristled. "Watch your tongue." "I watched your pain," Abaddon snapped, his voice slicing through the air. "At terror. I watched you break yourselves against the walls of the throne world for nothing. I watched your genius become bitterness." The warsmith stepped closer now, his breath hissing from his mask. "And what do you offer? More war, more failure?" Abaddon did not flinch. "Number one, offer an end. Not to war, but to wandering, to this endless loop of self-destruction." He turned, letting the stormlight catch on his gauntlet. "I offer you the purpose Horus failed to give. Not a galaxy ruled by gods, a galaxy broken by them and rebuilt by us." Sargol was silent. For a moment, the only sound was the wind hissing over the rusted earth. Then came a different voice, low, mechanical, full of sorrow. "You speak as though you believe it," said a figure behind Sargol. Warsmith Vorix, one of the oldest surviving commanders of Medrengard. "But belief is what broke us. Belief in Horus. Belief in unity." Abaddon looked at him. "No," he said. "Blind faith broke us. But faith forged with will, tempered by betrayal and pain, that can build something greater than any god's favor." Vorix stared at him for a long time, and then, slowly, he nodded. One by one, the Iron Warriors lowered their weapons. Not in surrender, in acknowledgement. They would not kneel. They were not the kneeling kind, but they would march. Sargol's voice, when it came, was bitter, but resolute. "You will have the forges of Medrengard. Our engines, our guns, our hatred. But if you fail us as Horus did," Abaddon's eyes glowed in the gloom, "then I will welcome your judgment, when my work is done." That night, the forges roared. The Iron Warriors began their grim procession, not in celebration, but in calculation. Warsmiths plotted new sieges. Demon engines stirred from slumber. Ships once left to rust were reforged under warp-lit skies, and Abaddon stood alone atop the broken battlements of the Iron Citadel, staring into the void beyond. He did not smile. He did not breathe easier, because he knew what came next. The worst alliances were yet to come, those of blood, of madness, and of fate. The Black Crusade had not yet begun. It had only stretched its fingers across the surface of chaos. And deeper still, something watched, waiting. The warp winds howled, in a place where direction had no meaning, where up and down melted into a storm of thought and hunger. The eternal vengeance glided like a blade through silk. Its hull shimmered with glyphs, some ancient, others still writhing. The ship was no longer a vessel of war alone. but a shrine to ambition, humming with the voices of dead stars and unborn fates. Within the command sanctum, Abaddon stared at the galaxy laid bare before him. The stars twinkled, not with hope, but with distance, with defiance. So many still dared to resist. So many still believed. He had forged alliances. He had awoken war bands from slumber. But one truth remained. Power in chaos was not given. It was taken. And to complete his dark symphony, he would need the most dangerous of his instruments, the Thousand Sons, masters of the impossible, and traitors to even their own cause. Abaddon turned to Iskandar Kaon, his trusted sorcerer lieutenant, once a prince of Prospero, now a weapon bound in silence. "Where is he?" Abaddon asked. Kaon bowed his head. "Amontep. He's begun raising the dust choir again." "Magnus still watches?" Kaon paused. "Always, but he will not intervene." Abaddon nodded. He did not fear Magnus. He feared what Magnus no longer cared about. The eternal vengeance altered course. Threads of unreality snarled and bent, parting before the ship like water. They arrived at Amontep 3 days later, though the clocks read 10 years past. The surface was a mirage of glass and memory, cities that lived backwards, towers that whispered in binary, a world that bled knowledge, and at its center, a palace of screaming mirrors. This was where he waited. Ahriman, chief librarian of the Thousand Sons, exile, sorcerer, architect of the rubric that damned his own brothers to eternal dust. He met Abaddon not in a throne room, but atop a floating dais surrounded by orbiting tomes and fire that did not burn. "You've come at last," Ahriman said, voice hollow and beautiful. "I was beginning to think you were afraid." "I am," Abaddon replied. That gave the sorcerer pause. "Of what?" "Of trusting you." Ahriman smiled, though his eyes remained cold. "Wise." They stood for a moment, watching the stars. "You want my legion," Ahriman said. "I want your mind." "Then you are more foolish than I thought." Abaddon stepped closer, his presence weighing down reality itself. "You knew what Horus could not grasp. That victory without understanding is just another form of failure. You saw the truth behind the gods." Ahriman turned away, robes whispering like dead parchment. "I saw too much." "You saw enough to survive?" "No," Ahriman whispered. "I simply didn't die." Abaddon said nothing for a while. The wind blew across Amontep, carrying fragments of shattered time and discarded prayers. Finally he spoke. "I do not offer redemption, nor vengeance, only a purpose worthy of your curse." Ahriman turned his gaze back to Abaddon. "What purpose?" "To end this lie." Abaddon reached into his cloak and produced a relic, a sliver of bone wrapped in runes and shadow, a piece of the Emperor's gene code, stolen from a forgotten vault beneath Luna during the 7th Black Crusade. Ahriman's breath caught. Even for one who had lost faith in gods, the weight of that object was undeniable. "You intend to break him. I intend to show the galaxy what he really is." Ahriman stared long at the shard, then at the man holding it. "You would burn the galaxy for a truth no one wants. I would burn it because they fear it." Silence stretched. Then slowly, Ahriman extended a hand, not in allegiance, but in challenge. "Then you will have the dust choir, and my fire." Abaddon clasped his wrist. Their pact sealed, not in blood, but in purpose. As the Thousand Sons awoke from stasis, the sands of Amontep turned black with warp flame. Rubricae stepped from their catacombs, silent and hollow. Demons whispered along the edges of the gathering storm. Spires cracked open like eggs, releasing horrors once sealed behind 10,000 runes. And above them all, Abaddon stood, flanked now by knowledge and fire, He had warriors of siege, of slaughter, of sound. Now he had sorcery. But with power came echoes. In the warp something stirred. Not the dark gods, something older. And far across the stars, in a chamber of silence atop the imperial palace, a figure stirred on his throne of gold. The shard of his body had been touched. The clock had begun again, not for salvation, but for reckoning. The warp was a sea of lies, and Abaddon had learned to sail it by making truth his anchor. But even truth can rot. The eternal vengeance drifted in silence between realities, its hull groaning like a living thing, thick with voices that were not voices, memories twisted into scent and sensation. Somewhere deep in the belly of the ship, cultists whispered litanies in tongues long dead, while demon engines dreamed of slaughter. But in the command sanctum, the Despoiler stood alone. Ahriman's words echoed still. You would burn the galaxy for a truth no one wants. And yet, Abaddon had not flinched, because the lie had already burned everything worth saving. But he was not yet whole. There was one last legion he had not called, and he did not call them now out of strategy. He called them because he had to. The Night Lords, terror made flesh. Born of Nostramo's broken bones and raised in the shadows of cruelty, the Night Lords were not warriors. They were reminders. Reminders that fear was older than civilization and more constant than faith. They did not fight for cause or God, not even for vengeance. They fought because the galaxy deserved to suffer. And yet, they had followed Horus once. They had bled for a dream. That was why Abaddon needed them, because they remembered what it was like to lose everything and keep going. He sent Cain first. The Night Lords did not welcome visitors. They stalked the void aboard their splintered vessels, void sharks trailing darkness, adorned with flayed banners and corpse lights. Their fleets were not united, only bound by old pacts and darker secrets. To reach them was to walk into nightmares willingly. But Cain found them, and in time, they came. It began with a ship, not just any ship, Echo of Damnation, once the flagship of the 8th Legion's most infamous son, Talos. Its arrival was silent. No heralds, no transmissions, just a long, slow drift into orbit above the eye's edge. And from it came 3 figures, tall, cloaked in darkness that seemed to breathe, and behind them, a trail of skinned corpses hanging like banners. Abaddon stood waiting as they entered the sanctum. The lead Night Lord removed his helm. His face was a ruin, pale skin stretched over bone, mouth too wide, eyes black with the absence of light. He smiled. Ezekiel, he said, as if tasting the name, still pretending to care. Abaddon didn't smile. Still pretending not to? The Night Lord laughed, a dry, hungry sound. My name is Severix, once of the 8th, now. A memory. You came. We came to see if you had become as boring as the gods. Have I? Severix tilted his head. No, he said. You've become worse. You have hope. Abaddon stepped forward. I have purpose. Severix shrugged. Same poison. Another step forward now, smaller, wrapped in shadows, bearing a face crafted from grafted skin and starlight tattoos. She said nothing, but her presence chilled the air. Karazana, Severix said. She speaks through pain. Best not to ask whose. And the third? Abaddon asked. A hulking figure stepped forward, clad in midnight plate etched with scars. His helm bore no eyes, only silence. Severix smirked. We call him the Hollow. Abaddon looked at them. 3 monsters, 3 echoes of a legion that had long since become legend. You've not sworn yourselves to me. No, Severix agreed, but we've sworn ourselves to the end. Abaddon looked away and nodded. That will be enough. That night, beneath a bleeding sky, the Night Lords joined the crusade. They did not kneel, they did not cheer, but they carved the vengeful spirit's insignia into their flesh and laughed as they bled. Abaddon watched them from afar. Ahriman approached, eyes narrowed. You trust them? No. Then why summon them? Because terror, Abaddon said quietly, reminds the Imperium that we are not myths. Ahriman said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned and left. And Abaddon, alone again, returned to the relic chamber. He looked at the gene shard of the Emperor. He did not touch it. He did not pray. He simply watched. And as warp light flickered across his face, he saw his reflection, split, imperfect, not Horus, not human, something in between, something inevitable. The legions were gathering. The stars were shifting. The final war was no longer a dream. It was forming shape. But in that quiet, beneath the weight of 10,000 years, Abaddon felt it again. The doubt, the question. Was he building a future, or just finishing a death that began with Horus? And in the darkness of the chamber, the relic pulsed, not with light, with memory. And far, far away on a golden throne that screamed silently across time, the Emperor dreamed. Or perhaps he listened. The warp had grown quiet, too quiet. Not peace, there was no such thing, but a stillness. The kind that comes before blood hits steel. The kind that thickens the air before a god begins to bleed. Abaddon stood before the assembled council aboard the Eternal Vengeance. For the first time in millennia, the great traitor legions, fractured, cursed, and lost to time, had sent envoys, champions, echoes of themselves, not for unity, not for glory, for a reckoning. The table before him was an obsidian disk etched with 10,000 war campaigns, planets that no longer existed, names that had long since vanished into warp-ravaged dust. This was not a table of planning. It was a tomb. Fabius Bile sat to the right, skin pale as parchment, his every breath mechanical, every twitch laced with contempt. Ahriman to the left, floating slightly above his seat, eyes glowing with unseen equations. Khan sharpened his axe across his knees with slow, agonizing patience, while Lucius whispered threats to himself. Typhus, rot incarnate, leaned on a staff made of bone and rusted scripture. The demon prince Anaxagoras, once of the word-bearers, stood with flame licking across his shoulders. The Night Lords hung in the dark corners, unseen but felt, and Abaddon at the head, silent. He had gathered the worst horrors the galaxy had ever known, and now he had to command them. We strike now, Abaddon began, voice calm, slow, deliberate. Not with desperation, with inevitability. Again with the theatrics, Bile muttered, brushing rot from his sleeve. Do you have a target or another sermon? Abaddon ignored him. The Imperium is still reeling. The cicatrix maledictum was only the first fracture. But fractures can heal. We make sure they don't. Kion stepped forward, conjuring a map of the galaxy from warp light and ghost code. A web of flames flickered across the stars, each a world targeted, each a lifeline of the Imperium. Abaddon's finger hovered above one. Vilamus, murmurs. Fabius scoffed. A shrine world, sentimental, not strategic. Ahriman narrowed his eyes. No, not sentimental, symbolic. Abaddon nodded. Exactly. Vilamus is not important for what it defends, but for what it remembers. It was where the Emperor is said to have spoken his last mortal words before the Siege of Terror. It is the soul of their myth. Typhus chuckled wetly. So we burn their soul. We do worse, Abaddon said. We erase it. Ahriman smiled faintly. Even myths die in silence. But Severix of the Night Lord spoke then, his voice dry as ash. And the Grey Knights, the Inquisition, you awaken them if you move on sacred ground. They will come, Abaddon agreed. Let them. For a moment, silence settled again. Then Khan stood, slamming Gorychild against the obsidian floor. Enough words. Let the galaxy scream again. The council broke. Plans were dispatched. Armies prepared. Rituals began. Old ones, forgotten even to demons. The warp boiled, but Abaddon remained behind, alone at the table. He looked down at a small mark etched into the edge. A faded, almost invisible rune. The sigil of the Lunar Wolves. Once, it had meant unity. Now, it meant memory. Ahriman returned, his voice soft behind him. You still remember them? Abaddon did not look up. I remember what we lost. That is not the same. They would not follow you now, not even Horus. Abaddon turned to face him. Number. But they would understand why I must walk where he fell. Ahriman studied him for a moment, then spoke carefully. You've gathered us, united what could not be tamed. But do you truly believe this ends with victory? Abaddon's eyes burned softly. Number, this ends with truth, and the galaxy cannot survive it. Outside the ship, a tide of darkness rolled forth. The 13th Black Crusade had been a warning. This was the 14th, not a war, a message. And across the galaxy, astropaths screamed and tore out their eyes as the signal passed through the warp. Vilimus must fall, not by blades alone, but by forgetting, by silence, by unmaking. Because Abaddon was done with being remembered as failure. He would be remembered as the last page of their story, the one written in shadow. The stars above Vilimus shimmered like sacred fire. 1,000 stained glass spires pierced the void, each etched with the image of the Emperor's hand raised in eternal benediction. The planet below was silence, holy silence. Choirs sang in the vacuum of orbit, voices trained from birth to praise a god who never answered. But in the deep places of the warp, something stirred, and then it fell. The eternal vengeance arrived not in force, but in shadow. It slipped through the rifts between thoughts, bypassing orbital defenses like a memory forgotten mid-prayer. No alarms sounded, no cries of warning. One moment, the sky was calm. The next, it wept blood. Abaddon stood upon the bridge, his breath slow, his gaze locked on the shimmering iconography of Vilimus's surface. The world did not know he had come. Not yet. Behind him, the chosen began to gather. Typhus led the first wave, plague ships vomiting filth across the upper atmosphere. The skies cracked with green lightning as Nurglite spores rained onto cathedrals, each droplet birthing rot and ruin. Bells tolled in reverse. Priests melted as they knelt in prayer. No prayers were heard. The Night Lords followed next. They did not descend in formation. They fell like knives, like curses made flesh. They struck in silence, tearing through refugee corridors, whispering lies into the minds of the faithful before the blades ever touch bone. They left symbols etched in ash, a child's cry burned into stone, a mother's plea written in her own teeth. And then the 1,000 Suns came, not as warriors, as unmaking. Ahriman's cabal marched into Vilimus's holiest sanctum, the Scriptorum Aeternis, where every word the Emperor had ever spoken was recorded in silver script on vaults of golden parchment. They did not burn it. They did not steal it. They unraveled it. Reality twisted as they walked. Time skipped, reversed, collapsed into singularity. The memory of the Emperor's voice was unthreaded from time itself. Entire psalm worlds blinked out of existence as if they had never been sung. The librarians of Vilimus, heroes, prophets, saints, became echoes, their minds overwritten by silence. And still, the Imperium did not understand. Only when the sky itself tore open and demons walked fully formed through the temples did the defenders cry out in truth. But it was too late. The grey nights arrived in force, silvery comets blazing with psychic light. Their arrival cracked the veil and brought a moment of clarity to the madness. Led by Grandmaster Arven Stern, they carved their way through the demonic hosts with righteous fury. Each step a hymn, each strike a prayer. But this was not a war they could win, because Abaddon had not come for conquest. He had come to break belief. He landed last. Wreathed in darkness, his aura smothering the battlefield. Like the final breath before death, Abaddon marched into the Basilica of the Emperor Ascendant. Its doors, taller than Titans, melted before his presence. Its defenders, paragons of faith, stood ready, tear-streaked but defiant. He said nothing. He raised Draconian, and with one stroke shattered the altar. Not the statue, the idea. The flame that lit the room went out, not in fire, but in meaning. As the walls crumbled, as warp storms swallowed the upper towers, as the grey nights fell back under waves of madness, Grandmaster Stern stood alone before Abaddon. His armour cracked, his soul ablaze. "You will not win," he said. Abaddon looked down at him, not in anger, but in something close to mourning. "I already have." They fought in silence. No god screamed, no demons roared, just two remnants of broken dreams, trading blows under a dying sky. When it was over, Abaddon stood above Stern's broken body. He did not strike the killing blow. He did not need to. The light of Vilimus was gone, not extinguished, unwritten. Across the galaxy, Imperial scribes suddenly found references to Vilimus missing. Holy texts warped. Sermons collapsed mid-sentence. Children could not remember the world's name. Veterans wept in confusion, unsure why their hearts ached. It was as if the Emperor had never spoken there. And in the warp, the god stirred. Not in rage, in recognition. Because this was not destruction. This was desecration. And Abaddon had done what Horus could not. He had scarred the soul of the Imperium. In the aftermath, the warbands withdrew. The eternal vengeance sailed again, trailing silence in its wake. And Abaddon, alone in his sanctum, stared at the relic of the gene shard once more. He no longer wondered if he was becoming like Horus. He knew he had surpassed him, because Horus had broken a man. But Abaddon had broken belief itself, and the cracks had only just begun to spread. In the deepest corners of Segmentum Obscurus, where light dimmed and the Emperor's name was spoken only in whispers, the galaxy held its breath. Vilimus was not merely destroyed, it was forgotten. Astropaths who once chanted its praises now stared into the void, weeping over a silence they could not name. Saints painted upon cathedrals across 1,000 worlds began to fade, their features softening into blankness. Scholars tore pages from holy texts, confused by missing verses. In the minds of the Imperium's faithful, a hole had been carved, and Abaddon stood at its edge. But as the gods watched, whispering their approval in voices laced with temptation, Abaddon did not look to them. He looked away. In the shrine chamber of the eternal vengeance, he placed the Emperor's gene shard upon a plinth, forged from the bones of sainted martyrs and carved whole fragments of the vengeful spirit. He gazed upon it, not with awe or hatred, but with finality. Ahriman appeared behind him, silent as ever, his footsteps echoes of thought rather than sound. "You are not celebrating," the sorcerer murmured. Abaddon's voice was flat. No victory was won. "Then what do you call Vilimus?" "A wound," not a death. Ahriman circled the relic slowly. And how many more wounds will it take? Abaddon did not answer. Instead, he turned and strode from the chamber. He did not trust Ahriman with silence. Silence, in men like him, became prophecy. Instead, he gathered his generals. Typhus arrived flanked by plague-ridden terminators, the stink of rot and inevitability seeping into the air. Lucius followed, his body now more scar than flesh, a mirror of every soul he had slain. Severix, cloaked in gloom, said nothing. He had taken to speaking only to the dead. They gathered in the war chamber, where star maps twisted in and out of vision, and Abaddon traced new paths with his gauntlet. Paths shaped not by tactics, but by trauma. "We move next on Kalth," he said. Ahriman arched a brow. "The Ultramar system? You would challenge Guilliman's sons now?" "They are not my target. Their memory is." Fabius Bile, appearing in a haze of surgical fumes, chuckled. "You wish to erase the very idea of the Codex Astartes." Abaddon turned his gaze to him, slow and unblinking. "If the galaxy forgets how to organize its armies, it forgets how to resist." Typhus grunted. "You would unmake them piece by piece, not by war, but by doubt." Abaddon nodded. "Destruction fades, but decay lingers." But not all voices approved. Khan, blood-caked and scowling, stood. "We are not scribes, we are warriors. Let them remember us by the screams of their cities, not the quiet rot of memory." Lucius hissed. "You still mistake rage for purpose." Abaddon raised a hand. The room quieted. "There will be blood," he said. "There will be fire, but only when it matters. I do not want the galaxy to fear me. I want it to question itself." Severix finally spoke, voice dry as desert bone. "And what happens when the Imperium stops asking?" Abaddon stared into the void of the star map. His voice was barely a whisper. "Then we've already won." The campaign was set. 1,000 warbands launched, not to conquer, but to distort. Temples burned selectively. Libraries were corrupted, not destroyed. Vox channels were hijacked, broadcasting false histories across whole sectors. AI-seeded prophecies slipped into the minds of Imperial tactical officers, rewriting strategies in subtle ways. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and across the galaxy, Imperial commanders began to argue. Canonical records of victories were debated. Tactical axioms once held as divine began to fracture. Entire chapters of the Codex Astartes were redacted from within, as if by the Emperor's will. But even as his plan took root, Abaddon was not content, because he had seen something at Villimus, a light, a presence. It was not a god. It was not the Emperor. It was watching. In his dreams, it took the form of the Warmaster, not himself, but Horus. Standing upon the bridge of the vengeful spirit, arms folded, eyes full of contempt. "Is this what you call victory?" Horus would say. "You shame us." And every time, Abaddon would rise from sleep in silence, armor slick with frost, breath catching in a throat long since beyond the need for breath. He had thought the shadow of Horus left him long ago. But shadows did not fade in the warp. They lingered, and they judged. Now, as Kalth loomed before him, its skies bright with Guilliman's pride, Abaddon prepared, not just to destroy a world, but to destroy its purpose. Because this was no longer a crusade. It was a correction, and the wound in reality had only just begun to bleed. Kalth, a name carved in loyalty, scarred by fire, remembered in defiance. Once, it stood as a monument to the ideals of Guilliman, a bastion of order, unity, and the righteous rule of law. A world that had rebuilt itself from the ashes of betrayal during the Horus Heresy, and stood as a symbol of imperial resilience, and now it would fall again. But this time, not by orbital bombardment, not by demons or plague, by erosion, by doubt. The Black Legion did not come as conquerors. Not yet. They came like echoes of old sins. Saboteurs whispered into Vox networks. Ancient logs from the heresy were unearthed, unedited, untouched, raw. Speeches from Erebus, lost footage of Lorgar's sermons, even grainy recordings of Guilliman faltering in the heat of betrayal. All broadcast, stitched together, made louder by repetition. Calth's population was used to threats. They'd endured word-bearers, tyrannid incursions, even the blinding solar fires from the planet's damaged core. But they were not prepared for truth, or what sounded like it. Preachers found their words turning cold in the mouths of the faithful. Children asked questions about the Emperor's silence that had no clean answers. The local Astra Militarum regiments received conflicting orders, each one signed with old, authenticated clearance codes from the time of the Great Crusade. And then, one night, the stars went out. The eternal vengeance arrived not in fire, but in shadow. Its hull cloaked in warp folds, it hovered in low orbit, leaking silence. Below, across Calth's capital hive of Solix Primaris, all technology ceased. No alarms, no servitors, no Auspex scans. And then the sky wept ash. Abaddon descended alone, no fanfare, no host, just his shadow cutting across the city square, where a monument to the Codex Astartes towered in polished adamantium. His boots cracked the mosaic floor as he walked toward it, his gaze fixed not on the monument itself, but on what it represented, the idea of order, the myth of control. Behind him, the Night Lords arrived, not with drop pods, but with dreams. They emerged from shadows, walking straight from the nightmares of Calth's defenders. The Ultramarines were fast to respond. Captain Drachias of the Ninth Company met Abaddon beneath the base of the monument. Clad in cobalt blue, his armor bore the laurels of heroism and tradition. "You have no place here, traitor," Drachias said. "I do," Abaddon replied softly. "I was forged here long before you were ever born. In blood, in betrayal." Drachias raised his blade. "You'll find this world has changed. We are stronger now." Abaddon's voice was calm, almost mournful. "Number, you've only grown more certain, and certainty is the greatest weakness of all." They fought then, blade against blade, fire against fury. The plaza erupted into war. The Codex statue cracked beneath their fury, its etched words splintered by every blow. Typhus led a slow push into the lower catacombs, releasing engineered plagues tailored not for the body, but the mind. Viruses that induced hallucinations, false memories, shared dreams of betrayal among command ranks. Lucius hunted commanders in the upper hives, killing them and wearing their forms for hours before revealing himself again in horror. And from the warp itself, Ahriman performed a ritual seeded long ago in the minds of Calth's machine spirits. Data screamed. Records rewrote themselves. History became fiction. By the third night, Ultramarine morale faltered, not because they were losing the battle, but because they were losing themselves. Captain Drachias, dying beneath the shattered monument, looked up into Abaddon's face and whispered, "What are you?" Abaddon knelt beside him. "No malice, no hatred. I am the proof that you were never right." He stood as the captain's heart failed, and with one swing of Drachnian, Abaddon cleaved the monument in two. The Codex split. Its commandments fell, one by one. And across the galaxy, the signal was sent. A data plague, an echo of everything that had just occurred. It replicated itself endlessly, hidden in the substructure of Imperial networks, disguised as protocol updates, tactical adjustments, sermons. It asked one question. What if Gilliman was wrong? Across 1,000 worlds, that question took root. Some dismissed it, others did not. And deep in the warp, even the dark gods paused, because Abaddon had not come to worship them. He had come to use them. And they, like the Imperium, were beginning to wonder if the Warmaster of Chaos might just win. It began with a silence, not the silence of peace, the silence before everything breaks. On the edges of Segmentum Tempestus, astropaths fell dead from their thrones, eyes melted into wax. Vox roots went dark, psychic relays ruptured. Across 100 systems, ships vanished mid-translation, and nothing returned. No warnings, no wreckage, only the void. Within that void, Abaddon moved. He no longer needed armies to make his presence felt. His war was becoming something more dangerous, philosophical. And the Imperium, built on ritual and blind repetition, had no answer for thought. In the aftermath of Calth, the Imperium's foundation had begun to creak. Ecclesiarchs disagreed openly about doctrine. Chapters clashed in private war councils over conflicting memories. Tech priests locked themselves in isolation, attempting to purge corrupted truths from the machine spirit's whispers. And in the eternal vengeance, Abaddon stared into the warp, not with reverence, but calculation. He had hurt the Imperium. Now he needed to test something greater, faith itself. His new target was Obsequentia, an ancient forge world once aligned with Mars, now operating under semi-autonomous rights. Unlike Vilimus or Calth, Obsequentia held no spiritual value, no legendary battles, no statues of saints. What it had was belief without question, machine faith, the kind that rewrote itself with every failure, claiming divine correction. And Abaddon wanted to ask a question it could not compute. He dispatched Ahriman first, not to destroy, but to implant. Whispered data spirits were released through forbidden rituals. Warp logic masked as encrypted schematics. The fabricators believed they were decoding sacred Martian prophecy. In truth, they were unraveling their own minds. The Mechanicus priests began receiving visions, perfectly calculated, perfectly blasphemous. Sacred rites were performed backward. Machines began to speak in binary that translated not into numbers, but doubt. And then the dreams began. Tech priests, known for rejecting emotion and flesh, began dreaming of bleeding. Dreams of machines weeping, of logic collapsing into screams. They whispered of a being who had no place in the Omnissiah's creed, Abaddon, the Cipher King, a god without algorithms. And the whispers spread. One Forge Magos, loyal and unwavering for 500 years, stepped from the spire of Omnifage Tower and fell to his death, without explanation. His final Vox log recorded a single phrase. Does the machine spirit lie? When Abaddon finally arrived, he did not bring an army. He brought a question. He landed in the central archive complex, unopposed. Red-robed servitors aimed no weapons. The data spheres hummed with uncertainty. He stood alone before the priests of core cogitation, elders who hadn't seen battle in centuries, and said, "You worship what you cannot understand. I am what you were never meant to comprehend." One priest dared to speak. "You are error incarnate." "No," Abaddon replied. "I am the update your code cannot process." And with that, the central data lobe collapsed. Not in fire, but revision. All blueprints stored within Obsequentia's archives began rewriting themselves. Patterns merged, timelines broke, schematics shifted into nonsense. Machines began assembling weapons that had no function, engines that screamed, servitors that bled memory instead of oil. And the Forge world did not fall in war. It glitched. It ceased to be understood. Lucius, watching from orbit, laughed for hours. Typhus said nothing. There was nothing to rot. Even Khan, impatient for blood, stood still, awed by the collapse of order without battle. This was a new kind of warfare, a war against understanding. And across the stars, others began to notice. Inquisitor Veritus, High Seer of the Ordo Hereticus, uncovered the data virus seeded at Calth. But when he attempted to isolate it, it rewrote his entire library's catalogue. Centuries of knowledge became nothing but praise for the man who should not be. Robert Gilliman himself, upon hearing whispers of Obsequentia's fall, broke, a golden chalice in his grip. "This is not chaos," he whispered. "No," said Belisarius' call behind him. "It's something far worse." Abaddon had become more than a warmaster. He had become a contagion, a fracture in the idea of certainty, not only among the Imperium, but among the traitors too. In the deepest parts of the Eye of Terror, demons argued. Some whispered that Abaddon no longer bowed to the gods, only used them, that he was becoming something new, something that even the warp could not bind. And far away, sealed in a chamber beneath the Palace of Terror, the Emperor's throne crackled with disturbance. His custodians stood still as visions filled the sanctum. Stars blinking out of memory, faith imploding from within, and the face of a man, not a god, not a monster, standing in shadow, whispering to the galaxy, "What if everything you believe is wrong?" Chapter 11 ends in stillness, not peace, the stillness before the truth arrives. They called it the Quiet Spiral, a term whispered by Inquisitors and Black Templars alike. It described the thing that was happening, slowly, silently. Not invasion, not corruption, but the collapse of certainty. Across the Imperium Nihilus, orders delayed themselves. Sermons fractured mid-verse. Entire crusades turned back, not from defeat, but confusion. More than faith was faltering now. Reality itself was folding in on the edge of untruth, and Abaddon stood at the heart of it. He did not roar. He did not burn worlds from orbit. He removed meaning. The eternal vengeance drifted at the edge of the Ocularis Terribus, where stars blinked with uncertainty and systems were mapped by contradiction. It was here that Abaddon met with his inner circle, not to plan another strike, but to confront the final question. "We've done what you asked," Typhus muttered, rot eating into the floor around him. "Calth is broken. Willem is forgotten. Obsequentia lies to itself. What's left?" "The soul," Abaddon replied. Ahriman tilted his head, suspicious. "Of the Imperium?" Abaddon turned slowly. "Of us." There was silence. The Night Lord said nothing. Lucius simply smiled. But Severix, hidden in the shadows, finally stepped forward and asked what none had dared. "Do you still believe?" The question hung heavier than 1,000 bolter rounds. It was not about gods. It was about purpose. Abaddon didn't answer at first. He looked out at the eye, at the warp scar of the cicatrix maledictum, stretching across the void like a wound that would never heal. Then he said quietly, "I believed once. In Horus, in vengeance, in the truth of betrayal. But belief changes." Ahriman frowned. "And now, I believe in endings." The statement chilled even the demons clinging to the hull, because what he meant was clear. Not just the ending of the Imperium, but of the legions themselves, of the gods, of the war. Abaddon was moving toward the end of the entire game, and he wasn't the only one. Within the warp, Tzeentch watched, his eyes narrowed, puzzled. Slaanesh trembled with an unfamiliar emotion, dread. Khorne's axes dulled for just a moment, and Nurgle laughed, because only he understood the decay that was coming. Not the decay of flesh, but of meaning. Abaddon's next campaign was not against a world, it was against a memory. On the lost planet of Narsis Trine, once the training ground of lunar wolves during the Great Crusade, Abaddon returned to the place he was first called brother. He walked alone through the ruins, watched by no one, remembered by nothing. Here he had been Ezekiel, son of the Emperor's vision. He entered the Chamber of Oaths, long collapsed, and stood before a wall that bore the names of those long dead, little more than dust and shadow now. He spoke to the silence. You were my brothers. You died believing Horus was right, or wrong, or necessary. He touched the shattered plinth at the center. I no longer care what we were. He drew Draconian, and I no longer carry your burden. And with a single stroke, he destroyed the memorial. Not in rage, not in mourning, in liberation. Ahriman, watching from the ridgeline above, realized then Abaddon had severed the last thread to the past. He no longer fought for vengeance, or glory, or chaos. He fought for the cleansing of everything. A galaxy without gods, without lies, where only truth remained, even if that truth was nothing at all. The chapter closes in the ruins of memory. Abaddon walks alone, no warband behind him, no banners in the sky. And in the warp, something begins to unravel, something that had been tied since the beginning, the past, the future, the illusion of purpose. And across Terra, a single crack appears on the throne, not in structure, in belief, because the galaxy is finally beginning to ask, what if the Despoiler is not the villain? What if he's the end we all deserve? The throne cracked again, not stone, not circuitry, but faith. The High Lords of Terror did not speak of it. They dared not. But every morning, another candle refused to light in the chapel of radiant oaths. Another custodian reported a nightmare he could not remember. Another psyker burst into flame mid-chant, whispering Abaddon's name without understanding why. Even Guilliman felt it, like the galaxy itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. On the eternal vengeance, Abaddon stood beneath an artificial sky, rendered in ancient lunar wolf blue, the last echo of what he had been, not out of nostalgia, but for ritual. The end was near, not for the Imperium, not yet, but for the long war. The 14th Black Crusade had no title, no proclamation. It was not broadcast to the stars. It simply was. Because now, even the gods were watching, and they were uncertain. Khorne grew impatient. Slaanesh starved of sensation. Tzeentch raged at the unpredictability. Nurgle remained joyful, for even endings must decay. But Abaddon no longer spoke to them. He prepared for the final convergence, a place whispered in chaos rituals and lost Eldar prophecy, a location unmarked on any star map, spoken of in psychic echoes and cursed ruins. Ursus Prime, a dead world, not abandoned, not destroyed, erased. It was here, the legend said, the Emperor first dreamed, not as a god, but as a man. Before Terra, before the Great Crusade, before the Primarchs, there was Ursus Prime, a place where vision began, and where it now must end. Ahriman called it a myth. Typhus called it bait. Lucius simply didn't care. But Abaddon believed, because deep in the warp, something had called to him, not with command, but with recognition. So he brought only 9 with him. 9 chosen, 1 for each betrayal that shaped his soul. They descended in silence, The surface of Ursa's Prime was ash and glass, frozen in psychic stillness. Wind did not blow. Time did not pass. Reality flickered, unsure of itself. They walked through a city of impossible geometry, where buildings looped into themselves and shadows refused to obey light. Here, in the very center, stood a temple. No banners, no guards, just a door that had no seams, and before it, a voice. It did not speak in words. It was a word, the first word. It echoed in Abaddon's mind. Child. He staggered just once, and the others reached for their weapons, but nothing attacked, nothing moved, because this was not a place of violence. This was a place of memory, and the gods could not follow him here. Within the temple, Abaddon found only a mirror that showed not his armor, not Drachnian, but Ezekiel, younger, fiercer, hopeful, loyal. He stared into it, and it stared back. Why are you here? The reflection asked. To end it. End what? The lie. And what will remain? Abaddon breathed slowly. Me. The mirror cracked, not from force, but from choice. He turned away. Outside, his warband stood frozen, mouths open, but no sound escaping. Time had folded in on itself. The eternal vengeance above flickered between moments, caught in a warp of non-existence. And from above, the warp screamed, not in rage, in fear, because something ancient had awoken. Not a god, not a demon, not even a man, but will. Abaddon emerged from the temple changed, not in body, not in power, in purpose. He had looked into the place where the Emperor's first dream died, and he understood now. The war was never about gods. It was never about loyalty, not even about rebellion. It was about freedom, and freedom was terrifying. As they returned to their ship, none spoke. Even Lucius, for once, was silent. Ahriman finally asked, "What did you find?" Abaddon did not look at him. I found that we were all wrong. And now, Abaddon's voice was low, firm. Now I end the war. Not with blades, not with fire. He turned toward the stars, but with truth. And somewhere, in the black between stars, a throne trembled, not from pressure, from recognition, because the final confrontation was no longer between chaos and the Imperium. It was between the idea of control and the man who refused to be controlled. The warp churned, not in fury, but in doubt. Abaddon had left a scar in its fabric, not a wound of rage, but one of disobedience. He had stood in the temple of Ursus Prime and denied not just the Emperor, but the very nature of the game being played. The Chaos Gods whispered among themselves now, like old tyrants realizing their throne might be made of sand. And across the galaxy, the ripple continued. Faith faltered, doctrine unraveled. Whole forged worlds ceased communication as logic spiraled into paradox. The Black Templars, once unwavering, began questioning battle rights. Rogue traders reported time loops near the maelstrom, worlds flickering in and out of history. And on Terra, beneath the Golden Throne, a single custodian wept, the last who remembered Ursa's Prime. He didn't know why, he just remembered, and that was enough. The eternal vengeance returned from the edge of unreality. Warp storms parted, not in fear, but in acquiescence. The crew spoke in whispers now. They no longer called Abaddon Warmaster. They did not dare give him any title, because he had become something else. He stood at the center of the strategium, gazing over a star map that no longer resembled any imperial chart. Stars had been renamed, routes erased, systems erased not by fire, but by forgetting. He drew no lines, marked no targets. Instead, he whispered a name, Saul. Ahriman stared at him. You would go to Terra. Abaddon nodded once. I will not burn it. I will not conquer it. I will speak to it. Speak, Typhus growled. To the throne. To the lie it upholds, Abaddon replied. To the myth we've all obeyed. Khan slammed his gauntlet into the war table. This is not war. This is philosophy. Abaddon turned to him, and there was no anger in his voice, only finality. Exactly. For too long, the galaxy had played a game. Loyalist versus traitor. God versus man. Faith versus blasphemy. But Abaddon had peeled it all back, and now he would offer the final heresy, the possibility that none of it mattered. As the eternal vengeance approached Sul, the Astronomicon began to flicker. Psychers screamed in agony. The light of the Emperor, so constant, so divine, faltered for moments at a time. Not because Abaddon attacked, because the idea of him reached Terra first. He did not bring a fleet. He brought a message, broadcast on every frequency, encoded in every dialect, from High Gothic to Mechanicus Hex. I do not come as servant of gods, nor destroyer of empires. I come to show you the cage you built yourselves. I am not your enemy. I am your reflection. The word spread faster than the defenses could fire. Entire sectors paused. Ships refused to launch. Orders were lost. Astropaths fell silent. And then, Abaddon came alone. He stepped from the warp in orbit, unescorted, standing atop a runic slab from the Temple of Ursus. No weapons raised, no powers summoned, no demons followed, just one man, clad in the echoes of a war that no longer made sense. The defenses around Terra locked on. Titans stirred. The phalanx shifted course. Custodians prepared for annihilation. And Abaddon spoke, not with wrath, but with truth. There is no God on that throne, only a memory, and memories do not rule. They rot, like we have rotted, in worship, in war, in silence. You call me Despoiler, but I am the future you fear, a galaxy unchained. And then he waited. No armies, no attack, just truth. Gilliman stood in the inner sanctum, watching from behind layers of psychic shielding. He said nothing for a long time, then whispered, "What if he's right?" That night, across Terra, dreams changed. Children dreamed of stars without names. Scribes awoke mid-recital, forgetting entire histories. One sister of silence collapsed during meditation, clutching her chest, weeping for a war she no longer believed in. And within the throne itself, the Emperor stirred, not in power, not in triumph, in warning, because he knew something no one else did. Abaddon was not chaos. He was not the end times. He was the choice that should have never existed, and choice was contagious. Chapter 14 ends not in fire, nor victory, nor defeat, but in a moment the galaxy had not known since the dawn of the Great Crusade. A pause, a breath held before a question. What if freedom was the true heresy all along? And so, the galaxy held its breath, not out of fear, not out of faith, but because something ancient had stopped moving. The war. It had raged for 10,000 years. It had consumed primarchs, gods, trillions of lives, and entire stars. It had justified its own repetition with prophecy, scripture, vengeance, and destiny. But now, for the first time since the siege of Terra, it hesitated. Abaddon stood on the edge of Sul, not with an armada, but with a truth so sharp it needed no weapon. Beneath him, Terra pulsed with tension. The custodies were armed, waiting. The Inquisition screamed for immediate exterminatus. The Grey Knights assembled rites to unmake his soul. And Robert Gilliman, the last loyal son, stood in the shadow of the throne, staring at the cracks, not in the stone, but in his certainty. He had heard Abaddon's voice, not in his ears but in his memories, and it had echoed with something more dangerous than heresy. It had echoed with clarity. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor stirred, not with light, not with rage, with regret. A flicker passed through the Astronomicon. The beacon that had once stretched across the galaxy trembled, as if unsure whether to shine at all. For a moment, a single second stretched through time, and everyone, from the lowest hive scum to the highest Archmagos, felt it. The stillness, the silence, the question, what are we fighting for? Abaddon did not wait for war. He transmitted one final message. You've built eternity out of decay, a throne out of silence, a god out of a prisoner. I release you from the game. And then, as the phalanx trained all its weapons on him, as Guilliman clenched his gauntlet in hesitation, as the Chaos gods roared across the warp in outrage, Abaddon turned away. He did not fire. He did not scream. He did not fight. He refused. And in that refusal, he unmade 10,000 years of war more thoroughly than all the fire and blades ever could, because by walking away, he proved something the galaxy had forgotten, that the game only continued because they all kept playing it. Time passed, but something had changed. The Imperium still stood. The Black Legion still gathered. The warp still howled. But it all felt thinner, more fragile, as if someone had shown the galaxy the edge of the stage, and now everyone could see the ropes, the cracks in the set, the script on the prompter. Belief still held, but it trembled. Faith endured, but with shadows. And in every shrine, every chapel, every hidden chaos altar, the name of Abaddon was spoken not with hate, but with dread, because he had done what no demon, no Primarch, no god had ever dared. He had made the galaxy think. Years later, pilgrims on forgotten worlds still speak of the night without war, the moment when the warp went quiet, when all machines stilled, when no orders came, and in that silence, many claim to have seen him. A lone figure in cracked black armor, walking a barren path, never looking back. Not a conqueror, not a prophet, not a god, just a man who refused to kneel. Epilogue. Some say the Emperor speaks now, that his silence has broken, that he weeps, not for terror, but for what he could never be. Not a ruler, not a savior, but free. And on the edge of the galaxy, in a place no chart records, a single relic floats in the void, the claw of Horus, abandoned, because Abaddon no longer needed symbols. He had become the end of symbols. The war is not over, but it is no longer the same, and neither is the galaxy, because truth, once whispered, can never be forgotten, even in the deepest dark, even amidst eternal war, especially then. Thus ends the tale of Abaddon the Despoiler, not in death, not in triumph, but in a silence louder than war, a silence that still echoes across stars.